Right, well, hello, welcome to, I guess, what is the final part, finally, of Project Nolan. Matt from Matt's Film is with me. Hello, Matt.
Hey, Nick.
This has been a long time coming, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been I think more than a year since I've seen Tenet, or since Tenet was released. So glad to finally finish.
I've got a feeling it may even be a year today as we saw the movie. So there might even some sort of poetic sort of justice. But what started out as a project which was created to review every one of Christopher Nolan's 10 feature films to coincide with the release of his 7th feature film Tenet, which we were obviously in huge anticipation of. And this is the content of the project. Lockdown, bees, work, holidays, everything has managed to get in the way of this project. But we've reviewed our favourites in all the movies in an order of our favourites, where there were some that were completely aligned and some completely skew in terms of our top. We now to Tenet, which is his most recent movie, and so I guess the idea is we can review this or look at it through the same lens that we've viewed the other films, which was like auteur theory, looking at representations, and maybe looking at it from a sort of conjugal point of view as well. Now, normally, Matt, you would do a synopsis at this point, but this is such a mad film, so confusing that it would give any number of seasons. It wouldn't necessarily have an idea of the film anyway. So I found one online on the IMDb page. It's quite a short one. I think this does it justice. See what you think, and that will probably lead into our discussion of the film. Okay. In a tight world of internet espionage, an aimed CIA operative known as the Protagonist is recruited by a mysterious organization called Tenet to participate in a global assignment that unfolds beyond real time. Mission: prevent Andrei Sator, a renegade Russian oligarch, precognition abilities from starting World War II. The protagonist can master the art of inversion as a way of countering the threat that is yet to come.
Sounds pretty good. That's probably as concise as you can be.
Okay. So this is we have to start with story, I guess. And as it's something, I suppose this is a strange way to kind of end this entire project, because neither of us were huge fans of this movie, it's safe to say. But is story part of the problem? Is it typical of Nolan? Is it up to Nolan standards? How do you feel about the whole story of this movie?
Well, we've talked numerous times in these videos about like criticisms that are sort of presented or usually cited when we're talking about Nolan's films, and I've never quite agreed with them, but I felt this is a film that a lot of those criticisms were present for me, and the story and the importance of the story and you know, the idea of Tenet and the idea of precognition and time moving forward and backwards. I thought that was a big problem in the film, because it's a great idea, but it dominates every aspect of the film to the point where I was trying to think of the right words for it, but I found the only word I can think of for Tenet and the story, it just becomes oppressive.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting one, actually. You know, where you're right. Whereas before, we talk at length that whether the usefulness of the gimmicks in Nolan's film, and whether they're gimmicks or they reflect the themes and so forth. You know, I know we discussed how Memento's unusual structure is a really important part of developing their characters. Certainly, for me, the discussion of Inception's own playing around with stories within stories, important part of the character, and of course Dunkirk's your favourite, which those three separate timelines are important for creating the drama of the film. But I think oppressive is a brilliant word to describe this, because you become you could easily become as an audience member obsessed with trying to work this film out, couldn't you?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think this point about story and why I've chose that word oppressive is when we teach narrative, we do it in a very sort of cold, logical way, don't we? When we talk about structure of film and how the audience understands how plot points are strung together and how we build towards a resolution. And I felt like this film was like the cinematic equivalent to that. It was an exercise in narrative and an experimentation in narrative, though, even to the point that they didn't even name the protagonist.
Yes.
So like John David Washington is literally just fulfilling a role, which is to move the plot from one point to the next. And mentioning those other films, Memento is incredible, and we have all this stuff with narrative and stuff like that, but the characters are also interesting, and we get a backstory. Like, his name is Lenny. We learn about his wife, we learn about him on an emotional level. Whereas I was thinking about this in preparation, we learn nothing about the main character, the protagonist, and even the first shot of him is him selecting from a variety of identities what to wear, like, which is the Russian police force.
Yes.
And I've realised that's probably a big issue with the film, is that I just do not care about any character in the film, and that's the only Nolan film I've ever watched where I've thought that way.
And we talked a lot about characters throughout the whole project. One thing that we agreed, part of the sort of Nolan-esque hero, is that these are characters who are utterly flawed in their decision making. They might be heroic, and they might be we're rooting for. Cooper jumps out as part of that for in Interstellar. People, it could be every man, or it can be some extraordinary, like Dominic Cobb, from Inception, Batman, of course. Either way, they are characters that have complexity that are beyond the story, that are flawed. They have something that means that they are vulnerable, usually a psychological weakness. John David Washington's protagonist in this is the first I've seen a Nolan hero where he's too cool. He wins, like he's good at everything, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem with it, and it's even when he meets Elizabeth Debicki's character for the first time, and then he's taken into the kitchen, and the way he dispatches so quickly and efficiently, like the antagonists, it's on the first viewing, and maybe it's quite exciting and quite a good scene to watch, but actually on repeat viewing, it's just, I think it made the film really boring and uninteresting and quite dull for me, because you're right, he is like almost like this Deus Ex Machina in the way that there's a problem and he just comes along and solves it without any real conflict.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the final sort of conflict is just sort of solved for him by Robert Pattinson's character sacrifice. So, the key to narrative is conflict, isn't it? And how much of that was there, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the back of that, you're still looking to work out what the story is and how it works. Again, that invades in that space, or maybe it covers over the fact that there's a lack of character development within this, and it's such a potentially a missed opportunity for a story that I suppose we ought to do the old spoilers at this point, just because we'll be talking about the plot points. The main this shouldn't be too much of a spoiler, because I think we worked this out just looking at the name of the film, but the premise of the narrative technique is that film moves forwards as well as backwards. We see scenes once, but different contexts where time is moving backwards. There's a great opportunity for character development there, because of course you see a character's actual development, but it's never used. My big for the story was the gimmick of the Tenet version was that it was so complicated. First time ever in a Nolan film, I gave up trying to work it out, and it's funny. I for a long time, but because I knew I did this project, I have avoided reading any review of this movie. I kind of caved because I did make me feel a bit stupid watch film, right? So I read Mark Kermode's review of it, and I swear he had exactly the same. He had the same experience as me, whereby he was watching it, couldn't understand it, decided that it was okay to not understand it because probably it worked out. And because Nolan, he's got a diagram where that proves that this works. Yeah. But it meant that I could abdicate responsibility of working it out. The first time I ever saw Memento, I loved working it out and putting it together, right? Same with the Prestige, which still baffles me. But this, I thought, well, it will make sense. There won't be a plot hole, so I don't need to bother. And that's a real shame, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes back to this idea of narrative and the idea dominating and oppressing every aspect of the film. So it's established pretty early on that the time moving backwards can't be changed, and although you can maybe see and interact with the other sort of flow of time, you can't actually change anything. So when there's moments where we know an event has happened or about to happen, and the characters in the timeline moving forward. They're trying to prevent something or get somewhere in time. We know it's not going to succeed, or we know the conclusion is already preset. So there's never any moments where you feel like characters can actually affect any change. So that's what I mean. It dominated so many aspects of the film that it just stripped everything away, and the only thing you left is this big idea. And I've never quite liked that idea of Nolan, all the filmmakers, the films are so smart you have to think about it.
Yeah.
And for me, it's not that necessarily the audience don't understand it. It's bad film. It's just bad design, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah. I think you're right. It's interestingly, another thing I read was how he seems to have listened to some criticisms, maybe not others. So, of course, one thing we've discussed is the extent to which Nolan relies on exposition in these pieces.
Yeah.
And again, exceptions and an interesting one with their certain characters. Elliot Page's Ariadne, who seems to solely exist to tell us as an audience, or be an audience surrogate to help us understand what's going on. In this film, he has obviously done all that completely. So you're in the dark most of the time. That entire end sequence, I'm unclear as to why they're battling with each other in that way. Phrases like time pizza movement sound like it makes sense, but I still really don't know why they couldn't have just done it. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I mean, in Inception, we have Marion Cotillard's character is Cobb's wife, and you're right, their conversations are used to explain, for exposition, to explain the concept of the film. But the consequence of that, or a side effect, or what happens simultaneously, is you get emotional content, and you get emotionally invested to an extent, and you understand what motivates Cobb. I have no idea what's motivating John David or the protagonist. Don't quite understand the weird friendship at the end with Robert Pattinson, because the only thing they talk to each other about is the concept of the idea. And there's never, from memory, there's not really any moments where there's any humanity in it at all. And I think ultimately that is my underlying feeling about the film. It was just really bleak. The idea was, and it was presented in a way, the aesthetic was just grey and boring and bland. And honestly, it made me feel bad coming out the cinema. I felt quite down after it, because there was no humanity in the film, but also the resolution really wasn't very satisfying either, and that was very bleak.
Yes, and there's a couple of real wasted opportunities, or there are some good things about this movie that wasted in this film. This is arguably one of the times Nolan's written or that we have a really decent female character within the movie. I thought, and I think Elizabeth Debicki is one of the highlights of this movie. I think she's great. She's a character that has agency. Of course, ultimately it's futile because she's governed by time. I thought she was brilliant in this movie, which feels like a wasted film. And the other brilliant thing about this movie is Kenneth Branagh. And of course, he feels somewhat out of place in a movie this bleak because he plays a pantomime villain, doesn't he? He is so arch and over the top, and I don't know, almost kind of a camp character. Really, it's so in your face, but he's brilliant. I can't believe I've never seen him play a baddie this well before.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I think especially with that sort of set of English actors or British actors in particular, like Hugh Grant, there's so many expectations and assumptions made about them when we expect them to play certain character types. That maybe I was guilty of that going in. I was really taken back by Branagh, and it's one of the most, crystalline expressions of evil I've ever seen. There was absolutely no humanity, and that idea of, I'm not going to survive long, so I'm not only going to end the world, I'm going to erase everything that's happened up until this point. That was so scary, and he was so horrible that, you're right, he contributed to that, where he just made the world even more oppressive and less enjoyable. And then, the ties to Eastern Europe and the nuclear fuel, things like that. It was all of the worst aspects of society and the world that we live in. Compressed in 2 hours, and it was really I've never really seen a film like it actually has an effect on me like this, where it made me sort of dislike Christopher Nolan for making me
it's a time, and I suppose it's even more odd that it was released during the pandemic and so on. Immediately we talk about, does Nolan make films of his era? He doesn't seem to consciously do that. He'd never seem to have political commentaries movies. Of an era to release his movie, that was it, wasn't it? Essentially, I suppose the juxtaposition of Sator as a baddie is the representation of a character, Max as the child, that full of potential and so on. I have a theory about this, which I've now found is rife online. So I feel it's a bit maybe I believe that Neil, so Robert Pattinson character, is Max. Which has been, and the best proof for this is that they may have spelled his name a million, which is those 4 letters. If you remember Neil, tenuous. It was called tenuous Tenet. That would be good. But I think there are hints to suggest that maybe he is Elizabeth Debicki's son.
Well, I definitely didn't pick up on this in the cinema, but you saying that now, it's familiar. So I don't know if I've read the same article or whether you've said that to me before.
I hinted when we came out of the pictures. I think I hinted at it, but didn't want to say anything in case you hadn't spotted. It's the last lines of dialogue are delivered over the top of a shot of Max as Elizabeth Debicki's character walking away, and that made me think that time. But maybe I'm trying to make the film more interesting for myself. I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised with Nolan because, again, he's so intricate in his planning, and everything is planned to the minute detail. And maybe that's a criticism of this film, where he got sort of lost in the woods, if you like, with the idea. But no, I mean, I'd assume that is probably actually the right way to read it. Knowing Nolan, not in his ever surface level, is it? There's always something a little bit more, another connection going on.
If we, of course, a big part of our conversations is in these films as works of ownership. We've been drawing between his themes and his ideas and his characters, and of course this one does feel somewhat, it falls down on those. Maybe almost feels like someone trying to do a Christopher Nolan movie. The counterpoint to the other theory would be genre, and I suppose in some ways that would be the most interesting thing about the movie, because I think I said to you as we came out of the pictures was, well, either that's a huge audition for a Bond film, or he never ever needs to make a Bond film, because essentially he's in it now, hasn't he?
Oh yeah, I mean, what if we talk? Well, I don't want to be all negative about it. The opening sequence is absolutely spectacular. Yeah, and it is exactly the same as, like, in terms of the structure of the film and the settings and the type of villain. It is a Bond film that has just got a big foot in the sci-fi genre. Yeah, and I agree. And regardless of what I think about Tenet, I am still really looking forward to his next film. And I don't want him to do a Bond film because, as I said, even though I don't like Tenet, you'd only compare it to that because it'd be so similar, and it couldn't live up to the scale and the idea.
Yeah, and you're right. The ticks all of those boxes. Is the locations, everything that reason people love Bond films in the '60s. Exotic locations. You've got the sort of evil Bond girl character. I love scene, for example, where racing on those catamarans, those incredible high-speed boats. Which are things of the written, and famous and so on. But even though that scene is pretty inconsequential, like it is always glorious just to look at. Wasn't it? It was sort of a beautiful piece of aesthetic.
Yeah, but I mean, I remember in the cinema watching that scene and being a bit, it's underwhelmed, and I could imagine like some of the Bond themes playing on top of it, because that's exactly how in a Bond film you'd cut to like the next location and it'd be some on the boat on the sea in Monaco, wherever it was. But again, I felt that's one of the criticisms we had about Inception. Maybe it's just that's an extension, like a maximized version of that corporate aesthetic. Yeah, and I do find that very bland. And I do have similar issues with it. I mean, I prefer Inception a lot more than this film, but they sort of are like twins in my mind. And I come back to my original points. I think we said this a long time ago, that Nolan, and this may be a general criticism of voting theory as an idea, but Nolan's best work, he needs a collaborator to write with him, because all his best work in my top 10 are all he's had co-writers.
Yeah, I mean, this when it was released, I think many people decided a sister to Inception or a sort of sequel in idea or style, and I totally agree. I think all of the criticisms that were levelled at Inception when we did our video, and that was my number one, were this kind of the anti-Inception, sort of so excited to think that this might be the bed semblance, but so disappointed with the coldness that it had, and also the lack of sort of characters. And again, don't get me wrong, John David Washington is as charismatic as a green Leonardo DiCaprio, but because he was flawed, I'm interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things it did say when we watched it in the cinema. It came out and just thought John David Washington is a star in like the truest sense, a film star in the truest sense, isn't he? He just holds your attention. But like on reflection and repeat viewing, you realise that charisma is not enough.
Yeah.
It gets down to character, and ultimately it's just not there.
I suppose another bonus, a good point, was it opened both of our eyes to Robert Pattinson and what a diverse actor he is, and he plays that Englishman abroad brilliantly, and he's got a role as a character actor, hasn't he? Because his fame.
Oh yeah, I thought he was great, and he's not someone someone's work I've necessarily paid too much attention to. Maybe, that's bad on my point, because of maybe falling into that trap of that's the Twilight guy. And I used to think this about Benedict Cumberbatch as well, like the stiff upper lip, a certain type of Brit. But both Cumberbatch and Pattinson, in this film, Pattinson in this film totally changed your mind. He's exceptional. Yeah,
very good and very, very watchable and likable. Yeah. But it just wasn't enough, unfortunately. So there we go. No music as well, but really worth touching to which is a bit of a letdown. But it does fit, what we I suppose we're hoping, or I mentioned the other day, that would be ironic. This was the middle film of his career, a sort of palindromic metaphor going on. We are still excited to see his next film. Interestingly, that we have delayed this video by accident. It's just been announced, isn't it? What's Nolan up to next?
Well, he's making a biopic of Oppenheimer. Is Joseph Oppenheimer, who is he's known as the father of the atomic bomb, but he led the Manhattan Project, which eventually led to America's atom bombs that they dropped in World War II. And what's interesting, though, mentioning that about maybe a halfway point in his career, is that it's the first film where he's not going to be working with Warner Brothers, isn't he? He sort of put his ideas out to tender, and he's gone with Paramount. Now, I'm interested to think, given the context in which Tenet was released, whether he jumped or whether he was pushed, actually. Because maybe we are in a sea change within cinema and mainstream cinema now, where Tenet came out and it was sort of an unofficial sort of idea behind it. It was like the savior of cinema, and it failed. And I wonder if Warner Brothers have now, they've got a new baby, Denis Villeneuve, haven't they, with Dune? So maybe they've decided those big concept films are no longer doable.
Yeah, I mean, we took at length during them of these projects about the one for him, one for us concept, and how official that ever was. I never know. But obviously, since the trilogy Dark Knight trilogy finished, they have all been for him. And so maybe Warner were applying a bit of pressure of saying, no, pick up a franchise or something more recognizable, and he wasn't willing to do that. Perhaps I just will never know.
Yeah. I think Warner Brothers, like Disney now, with the launch of HBO Max, so like they're really putting money into that. Unfortunately, it's franchises or nothing in terms of like big budget things. How do you franchise Tenet? You can't have a sequel, no TV shows, anything like that. And Nolan is not the type of person I would suggest that would bend to a studio's demands, and he's not a franchise person. So it's interesting actually that he has been like this unique voice in terms of, sort of, if you like, high art blockbusters. But actually, I wonder if Tenet has been was the last nail in the coffin for those type of films, and now he's going to actually find it more difficult to get funding for these ideas he has.
Yeah, maybe.
To say, but I can imagine a world where Christopher Nolan can't get a film made, but with a changing climate, maybe we're starting to see that.
Yeah. I mean, the only attached to this movie, and it's all calculation at the moment, is Killian Murphy. Of course, he's worked with a number of times, but Killian Murphy, I mean, Peaky Blinders is hugely popular over here, but he's not a big enough name to sell a blockbuster abroad, really, is he? I'd have thought.
No, he's not. So it's going to be interesting. It's reported to have a budget of 100 million. That was announced in the news story. So that sounds like a lot, but actually compared to the last few Nolan films, that's not actually that big. It's a relatively average amount for a big Hollywood release now. So I don't know. It's interesting to see what's going to happen with them.
But
even though what we said about Tenet, I'm still as excited for his new project as I was for Tenet and as I was for Interstellar and Dunkirk. It is just a blip where I think maybe he just went that step too far. And we don't know, maybe at Universal he'll be a bit more sort of controlled. I don't know, but I'm still very excited because it's just the idea itself is fascinating.
Definitely, yeah. Every idea will work, and an idea is man, and so that's what cinema needs, isn't it? Definitely. Brilliant. Okay, well, a strange ending way to end it, but at the same time, it had to be reviewed, and there will be another out there who disagrees. So, as always, tell us where we got it wrong. Explain the film to us if we don't understand, if we completely misread it. But also, tell us the bits that you loved about the film as well. Okay. So, as always, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's been great.
It's been really interesting. We'll be back with another project. We're still deciding what that would be. Maybe not quite as long as one, but certainly more film reviews and more different ways of looking at film, which is our bread and butter, isn't it? So it's we enjoy doing. Any suggestions are of course well.
Yeah, definitely. If you want us to review anything or a series or any films, let us know. Definitely.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, until next time. Bye.
All right.